Let us pray. Living God, speak to me. Speak through me. And if necessary, speak in spite of me, that your name might be lifted up. Amen. What do you wish for? What do you wish for? When you blow out the candles on your birthday cake, do you wish for health and happiness? Do you wish for peace each time you hear the news of another heinous act of violence? Do you wish that your friends or your family would choose a different restaurant for lunch? Perhaps one that doesn't mess up your order quite as frequently. Do you wish that the person or people sitting next to you on the pew had edited their choice of cologne, both in terms of quantity and quality? What do you wish for? You see, wishing is a fundamental act of our human existence as we follow our curiosity, explore our passions, and desire a good and virtuous life, both for ourselves and for those whom we love. So it's no wonder that in our text today, we find Paul engaging in this time-honored act of wishing. In our text this morning, we find Paul's wish for the church in Ephesus, and thus we find Paul's wish for us, the people of God. Paul's wish, which he puts in the form of a prayer, is that Christ would dwell in our hearts, strengthening our inner being with power through his Spirit, and that by his dwelling in our hearts, we all might be rooted and grounded in love. Really knowing the breadth and the length and the height and the depth that is the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge. Now, as a child, I used to wish, as I suspect most children do, that every day could be Christmas Day. If Christmas really is the most wonderful time of the year, why not wish for it at all times of the year? After all, what child doesn't like waking up to presents under the tree, and who doesn't enjoy gathering around the dinner table with friends or family to partake in good food and fellowship? So this morning, if you'll oblige, I'd like to finally get my childhood wish. And I want to draw our hearts and our minds to Christmas. Now, I realize that you might think it strange for me to be talking about Christmas. After all, it's June, not December, and I can already see you thinking, Patrick, it's just too early, not to mention too humid to get into the Christmas spirit. And I'll admit, our text from today is certainly not a nativity scene. In it, we find no angels singing, no shepherds kneeling, no wise men worshiping, and no Christ child sleeping. Nevertheless, I find in our text a profound reminder of the meaning and hope of Christmas. You see, Paul prays that Christ may dwell. That Christ may dwell in our hearts. And the word he uses here means take up permanent residence. It means God moves in and doesn't leave. It means that in Jesus, God has made a home with us. This is the hope of Emmanuel, God with us. And that's a hope we all need, and not just once a year. It's a hope we need while waiting by the phone to hear what the latest test results were. It's a hope we need while sitting with a family member or close friend, watching them be destroyed by a disease we're helpless to stop. We need it when we're counting on a job only to discover that someone else got it. We need it when we're wrestling to find out who we are and what we're to do with our lives. We need it when the systems in which we've trusted and counted on to provide for us fail. We need it when we pull up our roots, move away, and have to say goodbye. We need it when our relationships fall apart and our hearts get broken. We need it when a loved one dies and we face the future without them. We need it when we have to start over and find a new direction. We need it when we're betrayed by someone we trusted and must find the courage to forgive. We need it in a time when the evils of violence, hatred, and racism dominate our streets and even invade the prayer-soaked walls of our sanctuaries. We need it when we look at the world and we just have more questions than answers, when everything around us changes and we can't find a firm place to stand. Now, if I'm being honest, sometimes I wonder if there's so much tinsel and wrapping around the Christmas season that it becomes difficult for us to hear the heart of the Christmas story, a story about hope in the midst of hopelessness. After all, the Christmas story is about a displaced people. It's about an untimely pregnancy. It's about a coercive government. It's about homelessness and living in an occupied territory. It's about refugees and socially excluded shepherds. It's about a murderous tyrant and genocide. But admittedly, we really don't want to think about these things around Christmas. So we convince ourselves that while Christmas might be a story about adults, it's really a nice little happy story for children. So perhaps talking about Christmas on this hot and humid June morning invites us to look at the heart of the story afresh. But I want to do that by telling you a different story. This time, a story that's about children, but that's really for adults. The 2005 novel and 2008 film, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, is set in Germany during the Second World War, and the story that it tells is even more brutal than the Christmas story. The main character, Bruno, is an 8-year-old boy whose father is a soldier in the Nazi war machine. Early in the film, Bruno and his family move to another part of Germany where Bruno's father has become the commandant of a strange kind of camp. Young Bruno is often alone and eager to find things to do, so eventually he wanders out of the backyard and beyond the wood where he comes upon a high iron mesh fence. Within the fence, there are people, and these people seem to be wearing striped pajamas. So Bruno walks up to the fence. He sees a boy about his own age, so he introduces himself and learns that the other boy is called Shmuel. He's fascinated by Shmuel. They have an intriguing conversation, so Bruno arranges to come back to the fence and talk some more, which they do several times over the next few weeks. The two boys play games through the fence and talk about many things, often having to break up their conversation out of fear of being discovered. Bruno can't understand why Shmuel is incarcerated, why he has to wear pajamas, why he's so thin and hungry, and what role his own father has in all of this. Gradually, the tension in Bruno's own home intensifies as Bruno's mother and sister come to realize what's really going on in the camp. But one day, Bruno gets a surprise. He sees Shmuel in his home working in the dining room as a cleaner. Once again, Bruno can't understand why Shmuel is being treated like a slave. But he realizes that Shmuel is hungry, so he offers him some food. Suddenly, a soldier spots Shmuel and shouts at him, "Why are you eating? And where did you get the food from?" Looking suspiciously at Bruno, Bruno panics and says, "I don't know. I've never seen him before." Bruno quickly regrets his words and returns to the fence, hoping to see Shmuel and be reconciled. The large black eye on Shmuel's face vividly displays the price Shmuel paid for Bruno's betrayal. But Shmuel accepts Bruno's apology. Alas, Bruno's father finally agrees that this is no place for his wife and children and arranges for his family to be moved elsewhere. But for Bruno, this means the terrible prospect of leaving Shmuel. So he goes to visit Shmuel at the fence. This time, Shmuel has got some pajamas for Bruno to wear so he can blend into the camp and not be taken away with his family. Bruno scrambles under the fence and into the camp. He puts on the pajamas and dons a striped hat so that no one can tell that his head is unshaven. And the two boys set about searching for Shmuel's father, who's gone missing. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes. Soldiers appear, corralling large groups of people in striped pajamas and directing them toward the large barn. There's no escape, and Bruno and Shmuel are swept up into the crowd. All the people are herded like cattle down the steps and into the barn. At this point, Bruno's mother discovers he's missing and sounds the alarm. A host of soldiers start looking for Bruno, but it's too late. Bruno is in the barn beside Shmuel, and all the people in the barn are being told to take off their clothes and prepare for a shower. It's clear they realize that this is going to be no ordinary shower. But the full horror of what lies ahead dawns on the prisoners, on Bruno's family, and on the reader and viewer all at the same time. Somehow, both knowing and not knowing the terrible truth, Bruno and Shmuel clasp hands, squeeze tight, and it's clear that nothing in the world could persuade them to let go. As the darkness descends and the gas begins to be pumped in and the horror engulfs the barn, Bruno says, "You're my best friend, Shmuel. My best friend for life." It's a children's story, but it's not a children's story. It's a story about mass murder, about deception, about a nation's ability to hide the truth from itself and others. It's a story about merciless cruelty, apocalyptic genocide, and indescribable suffering. But at the heart of the story lie two boys who become friends because they don't know any better, vividly displaying the irony that they know better than anyone. They, in fact, are the only ones who do know better. So the contrast of the film is, on the one hand, two communities on opposite sides of the fence, divided by oppression, lies, hatred, and vicious evil. And on the other hand, two boys side by side, clasping hands as they face their deaths, knowing nothing more truly than the indivisibility of their hearts and the inseparability of their destinies, defined by trust, friendship, forgiveness, and love. I want to suggest to you that this story is closer to the reality of Christmas than your average nativity play. Why? Because Christmas is only superficially about gold crowns, wobbly camels, bed sheets on shepherds' heads, and who gets to play Mary. Christmas is about looking at Bruno and Shmuel side by side and realizing we're looking at a picture of God and us. Jesus enters the camp of danger with every likelihood that his entry will sooner or later entail his gruesome execution. Jesus takes on the garment of exclusion and prepares to face the consequence of humanity's rejection of God. Jesus becomes a Jew and discovers the reviling persecution that Jews have known throughout the ages. Jesus becomes a little child and places himself at the mercy of adults who can't be trusted to have any idea what they're doing. In this novel turned movie, we discover what is the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge. In Bishop Ken Carter's commentary on Ephesians, he writes that when the pavement ends, when we come to the end of our rope, when all else seems lost, it's in these moments that we most often reach out to God, but what we discover is that God has been reaching out to us all along. Fundamentally, when we are in the midst of our own personal struggles, Paul in Ephesians reminds us that in Jesus, God has come to dwell. That in Jesus, God has taken up permanent residence and is right beside us saying, "You're my best friend. My best friend for life. I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world but right here beside you. Perhaps that's what Paul means when he speaks of the breadth and length and height and depth of God's love for us, the love which Paul wishes for us to root and ground ourselves in. The reality that God did not just create us, didn't just love us from afar, didn't just work in history to rescue us and strengthen us and heal us. No, God's real glory and true nature appear in the real, substantial, material, physical reality of Jesus among us. Jesus just like us. Jesus beside us. And beside us not just in joy or in celebration, but beside us in grief, in agony, in isolation, and in abandonment. Jesus is Bruno, donning the pajamas, reshaping his whole life to be beside us, coming inside the camp of death when he just as easily could have remained outside. But Jesus is just as much Shmuel, carrying that black eye, forgiving us when he suffered for our sin. The Jew who includes even ignorant Gentiles in the solidarity of salvation. So, whose hand is holding yours in the chaos, mayhem, and terror of your world? Who is going out of their way to stand next to you in your time of need? Who has gone out of their way to make you their friend, has forgiven you when you turned your back on them, has come alongside you, worn your clothes, faced the reality of your existence, and known the fear that you thought was yours alone? The one standing beside us, saying we're his friend forever, clasping our hand and never letting us go, is Jesus. And the day we discover that, it's the best day of all. It's Christmas Day. Every day, all year long, and all of our years long. And that's not just wishful thinking. Thanks be to God.
Our closing hymn is hymn number 526, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. During the singing of the final verse, we invite our Raise the Roof interns to come forward for their commissioning. Let us stand now as we sing together.